Colleagues and friends, I rise to speak, of course, in support of Bill S-205. We all want a world without domestic violence, where supports and systems are in place to prevent men from committing abuse or assisting women to have relationships, leave relationships easily if they feel threatened with abuse. This will be the world we aspire to. In the meantime, we must try to deal with the imperfect world we have, a world where 4 out of 10 women have experienced some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime, where roughly every 6 days a woman in Canada is killed by her intimate partner, where every night almost 6,000 women and children sleep in shelter because it's not safe for them to sleep at home, where thousands are not able, of course, to access shelter because space is not available. I speak as the father of a young daughter, a husband, and a legislator who has the power to make a difference in not only my daughter's future, but the lives of thousands of girls and women right now who are experiencing domestic violence. This discussion is not about either-or scenario, where if we support measures to help reduce the chances of domestic violence, such as proposed by S-205, mean that other measures to address root problems of domestic violence cannot be developed as well. We must keep the focus on the victims of domestic violence who are living it right now and give them every tool available to help stop or reduce the chances and continued abuse or death. According to the 2017 Department of Justice report, gender-based violence against women is identified worldwide as one of the most pressing social human rights challenges. The root cause of domestic violence includes coercive control, defined as a pattern of controlling behavior used to instill fear or intimidation, the underfunding of shelters or housing and the lack of resources for prevention, and the role of police in investigating domestic violence. The problem has been exacerbated of domestic violence. The United Nations called the pandemic impact of violence against women a shadow pandemic, in which the isolation and financial precarity resulting from the lockdown teeter many at-risk female-identified people to abusive situation. If gender-based violence against women is one of the world's most pressing social human rights challenges, should we not use every tool possible to combat it? Many protections and support are needed for victims of domestic violence. Domestic violence can carry over into the workplace, threatening women's ability to maintain economic independence. During my time at the Canadian Labour Congress, I was part of a campaign to create paid leave for domestic abuse that culminated, of course, in the federal legislation in 2017 that provided 10 days off, 5 paid a year for victims of domestic violence. I have to say today, right across this country, in every jurisdiction across Canada, including the 3 territories, legislation now exists to provide for paid leave for domestic violence. The only place we're still to get paid leave, of course, is in Alberta. We're continuing to work on that. As part of the campaign, the Canadian Labour Congress partnered with the Research University of Western Ontario and conducted the first ever Canadian survey on domestic violence in the workplace. Some 8,429 workers were asked if they experienced domestic violence. 1/3 said yes. Of those, 82% said the violence negatively affected work performance. Almost 40% said it kept them from getting to work, and for almost 10% meant losing their jobs. More than half said the violence continued to at their workplace in the form of harassing emails, calls, and texts, or stalking or physical violence. Paid domestic violence leave is one support, one tool, just like the measures in S-205 are different supports for victims of domestic violence. What is S-205 trying to achieve? Putting the victims first. What it doesn't do, it will not address the root problem of domestic violence. It will not stop the initial abuse. It is not 100% effective in stopping every abuser from hurting their victim. What it is intended to do is to give victims the space and safety plan, reassess their relationship and their options for the future, increase the safety and freedom of victims by reducing the level of harassment and stalking, and making the victims more visible in the justice system by requiring them to have more information on the accused release, provide more ability to judges to require the accused to get treatment, help mitigate victims' feelings of fear. A woman who took part in a U.S. study on the use of electronic monitoring device said, "I always felt he was going to come out from nowhere and cut my throat or shoot me. Before he was put on electronic monitoring, I went down to 96 pounds. I couldn't eat from nerves, worrying if he was just going to break into my home or whether he was going to show up. He would stalk me, he would drive down to my home, he would show up in places. If I would go out, he would show up. Violations and presumptions of innocence of those of the accused before the crime under a peace bond." So there are some criticism of the bill, and I want to address that also. Electronic monitoring neither deals directly with the most root cause of domestic violence, nor does it provide, of course, preventive solutions for women to not have to deal with domestic violence in the first place. For example, economic, racial, and gender inequality must be addressed, which play a part in violence and its ability to escape it. For the victims, the EMS system can provide a sense of false security. It is not 100% foolproof, either in the technology, the response time by police, or in remote areas where technology may not be effective or reliable. I don't necessarily disagree with any of these criticisms or concerns. We do not live in a world where we can have a perfect policy solution. This legislation isn't perfect, none is. It is our job to find proper balance, a balance between the safety and security of victims and the rights of the accused. There are a number of countries who have implemented GPS tracking device to thaw the domestic violence, including Australia, England, France, Portugal, Spain, and the United States. I believe we need to be guided by the evidence of electronic monitoring from these countries. There is not a lot of quantitative research on the effectiveness of electronic monitoring for accused perpetrators of domestic violence who are on bail or under peace bond. However, there are many reliable quantitative studies that have suggested that use of EM is victim-centric, improve the victim's perception of safety, allow victims to feel better informed and better engage in the justice system. And evidence of breaches is more easily shown by electronic monitoring technologies, and victims may feel more supportive to report it. A national survey of practitioners from the U.S. provided that 75% of criminal justice professionals working with electronic monitoring methods felt the victims were more empowered by such systems, that it can restore victims' faith in the justice system. The same survey found that the majority of electronic monitoring practitioners were positive about its use in domestic cases, stating that it improved the quality and sufficiency monitoring perpetrators and hold them accountable. And the majority believed electronic monitoring effectively deterred perpetrators from initiating in-person contact with the victims. Interviews in 2012 research study showed that prior to the use of electronic monitoring, the perpetrators were able to continue his abuse of them more or less undetected without impunity. Once the perpetrator was subjected to electronic monitoring, the victims reported feelings of increased safety and freedom, and in the reduction of levels of harassment and stalking. Other U.S. researchers note that the court domestic violence case have higher levels of dismissal than other crime types due to the unique dynamics of domestic violence abuse and pressures on the victim. Empirical research from the U.S. have shown that increased level of victims' attendance at court and decreased likelihood of dismissal for cases that were continued over a long period of time as compared to the cases where perpetrators were released on bail without electronic monitoring. Finally, Spain, the pioneer in electronic monitoring, has been mentioned already in this debate. They have used electronic monitoring in domestic violence since 2009. One research, Ms. Garcia, who studied Spain's system extensively, has determined after a decade of growth of Spain's use of EM in restraining orders appears to be successful. Colleagues, I want to conclude. I agree that more should be done to address the root cause of domestic violence. But putting the victim first, we should use every tool possible to tackle the problem from every single angle. Electronic monitoring should not be considered a silver bullet to prevent domestic violence. The positive impact of electronic monitoring is enhanced in this bill with complementary interventions such as mandatory treatment strategies, but must also make sure that electronic monitoring include rigorous surveillance and case management through, of course, the probation or correctional services. Electronic monitoring provides a structure and can be habitual breaking by keeping offenders away from places, people, and activities that lead to offending. I believe this strikes a balance between the rights of the accused and the protection of victims. It also provides for treatment as should a judge, of course, feel it would be of help. I will support this bill to get to committee so that more, of course, fulsome study can be done to make sure its measures are best to make a difference in the protection of victims. Thank you so much.